everybody, it's Romania Black, and I bet you thought I was joking about bringing out Wine Chan for this round. I wasn't. It's time for the 2024 Husbando and Waifu Brackets Round 3. And let me tell y'all, this round, as I was watching Patreon vote for the winners of this round, I realized that this was going to be necessary. Yes, because we've reached the Sweet 16, the top 16 husbandos and waifus as voted on Patreon for 2024, based on the shows that I've seen. And, yeah, they're all 16 really good candidates, which means it's gonna suck to cut half of really good candidates. And so, at this point in the rounds, we have looked at loyalty, which is very important for any partner to have, any husbando, any waifu. We've also looked at physical affection and caring. Is that partner going to be able to love you? Whether it's caring for you, being physically affectionate, are they going to give you the time of day? And we narrowed down to 16 candidates on either side that were really, really deserving of being in the brackets. And so I thought, well, what criteria could we pick to narrow it down even further and kind of trim the fat, to cut away from all of the BS, as it were. And so I thought, well, if your partner's going to be loyal and they're going to be affectionate, they've also got to be able to communicate with you. So yeah, the criteria for this category was communication, something that's very important and near and dear to me. It's one of my majors. It's what I went to school for, to communicate with people. And so I thought, oh, well, this won't be too bad. How wrong I was. So we're going to dive into the top 16 husbandos to narrow down to our elite 8, as it were, and our waifus as well. So going into this, let's just go ahead and get the whole thing started, because I have a feeling it's just going to be a mess. Especially because Wine Chan and I have not been reunited in a long time, and I can already tell this is a bad decision. This was a bad decision, but they always end up being that way, but hopefully you all will be entertained. So, in any case, when I was looking at the brackets last round, you'll notice that I had done some crazy shenanigans to narrow down the top 32 to the Sweet 16. And so I was debating on going back to the original bracket as how it was set up. However, because we had done something funky to kind of narrow things down, and because a lot of the lower tier nominations had been the same amount of nominations. Like, to be fair, the top 4 seeds going into the Husbandos were Lan G, Nanami Kento, Geto, and Kazuki, of all characters. Those were the top 4 going into the Husbandos, and I have my tricky cheat sheet here. The top 4 waifus going in were Nina, Masato Katsuragi, Yushi Huang, and Yor, oddly enough. Or no, Maki Zenen. Maki instead of Yanli. But yeah, so what? So in going back to that, I decided, you know what? A lot of the nominees, aside from like the top 4, had very similar amount of nominations. I mean, there were a ton of nominations that were like 5 nominations, 10 nominations, 2 nominations. There was a lot of repetitive nominations, and I just kind of put them on the bracket in order that they were voted in. So when I got the nominations and went through and wrote them down with the numbers, I kind of based them on that. So I didn't put them in any specific order if they were tied in nominations. I just put them down in order from the nomination form. And I thought, well, is that fair going into the Sweet 16 to keep those brackets like they were? Or should we do a poll on Patreon to reseed the bracket, make it harder on myself, and make me have to explain it to you in more detail? And that's exactly what we did. So we reseeded the bracket. I took the top 16, had everybody vote for their favorites, let the chips fall where they were. And so for this round, I decided to tell you not only the top 16 as they were polled, but what would have happened if I'd kept them in the original order they were supposed to be. For the most part, 90% of the time, it would have worked out the correct way anyway, but there was one pair on the Husbando bracket and one pair on the waifu bracket that could have been completely changed had I not reseeded, and so we're going to talk about that. So let's start with the Husbandos. Thank you all so much for voting. Let's see how this goes. So with the Sweet 16, we started with our top seeded individuals. And so, surprising no one, Nanami Kinto was one of the top seeded in the bracket. And so they got paired up against Jean Kirstein from Attack on Titan. And the topic is communication, right? So this one, I feel, in my mind, could have been a little bit closer. I think Jean is a good communicator. I think Jean's problem, though, is that he does keep some things inside. There are certain things that Jean holds internally, and we all do that. We're all guilty of that. But in the series, there is some things that Jean keeps in internally that could be expressed more openly. Whereas with Nanami Kinto, not that Nanami is an open book, but he is the adult of all adults. He's gonna communicate with you and tell you if there is a problem, and you're going to fix said problem before you move on. That's what he's gonna do. So am I surprised that Nanami got 76% of the vote to advance to the Elite Eight? No. I do feel bad for our King Jean, though, because I think that against another opponent than Nanami, he could have done all right. But with that being said, we'll touch back on that, though, here in a little bit. When we get through the candidates that were supposed to be in rounds together, I'll go back through my chart here and show you where they originally should have placed. But Nanami Kinto is going to advance on to the Elite Eight. If we had, I might as well just go ahead and do it. If we had kept the brackets as they were, Nanami would have been paired up against Gilbert from Violet Evergarden, which we will talk about later. I think that Nanami still would have had the advantage over Gilbert. I think especially in terms of communication, and we'll talk about that in Gilbert's round later to come. But I think Nanami still would have won that round. And then Jean would have been up against Vash the Stampede. We're going to talk about Vash later on too, but I do think Vash would have edged out over Jean, and we'll talk about Vash when we get to him and expand more on that. But I think either way, the chips would have still fell as they did, so I feel comfortable with Nanami Kinto advancing to the Elite Eight. Next, we had Ash Lynx versus Levi Ackerman, our 2 and 3 seeds. Oh, this one hurt. This one hurt a lot. Not as much as some of the other ones that you guys are going to see, but this one was really hard because I feel like both Levi and Ash, neither of them, they both have really good hearts, and they both are caring in their own way. And if you know them as characters, you know that they're caring. You know that they are affectionate. You know that they are loyal. But when it comes to communication, both Ash and Levi, they do keep some things close to the vest, and they're not the best communicators, right? Not the best. They're good. They'll tell you like it is, but when it comes to stuff that's really, really bothering them, unless you're like, it's almost like a demisexual thing. Unless you are like on a spiritual level with Levi and Ash, they're not probably going to tell you like everything that's going on with them. Now, when it comes to their duties, their missions, whether it's Ash and his gang or Levi and the Survey Corps, yeah, they're going to be communicative. Both of them, absolutely. But when it comes to them personally in an intimate setting, they're going to be a little bit more reserved and held off. So this one was actually really, really close, and I don't blame it for being this close. But with a separation of 5 votes, Ash Lynx had 54% of the vote, and Levi had 45%, which is insane. It was very close, very, very close. And so if you look back at their respective rounds, Levi would have been facing Ray from Buddy Daddies, who we're going to talk about in a minute. And so he probably would have lost there. Maybe could have won. Again, woulda, coulda, shouldas. It's really a toss-up, but I don't think Levi would have won that one. And then Ash was going to go up against Kagami. We're going to talk about Kagami here in a little bit. And I'm going to shed some tears, so it's going to be okay. But who cares? That's not what we did. We ended up doing Ash versus Levi, and Ash won to advance on to the Elite Eight. In all honesty, do I think Ash Lynx very much deserves to be in the Elite Eight? Absolutely. Ash is like a classic protagonist for anime. He's a classic husbando. he deserves to be there. But so did Levi. So I feel bad. Levi's one of my favorite characters from Attack on Titan, and seeing him only advance to Sweet 16 hurts my heart, but what can we do? So then we had, we're going to go ahead and talk about this round, aren't we? Then we had Aki Hayakawa from Chainsaw Man and Kagami Taiga from Kuroko's Basketball. I'm going to need a big swig of wine chan to get this one down. This wasn't even a close poll. That's probably the most frustrating part about it. If I could say, there was a poll on here that we're going to talk about here shortly that was the difference of one vote. And if it had been like that, I would have forgiven it. I'd been like, yeah, one vote. That one person just thought that. It's fine. But this wasn't one vote. This was 60% to 40% in favor of Aki Hayakawa to be most communicative against Taiga Kagami, whose sole purpose and sole character function in Kuroko's Basketball is communication. There's not enough wine in this glass. This one crushed my soul. Because, you know, characters have traits that they're known for. And Kagami, throughout the entirety of Kuroko's Basketball, and it's not really a spoiler because it's very generic, but throughout the entirety of Kuroko's Basketball, Kagami Taiga communicates so much. There is not hardly anything left on that man's sleeve. He is airing it out in the open like yesterday's laundry. He is announcing it to the world. He is writing it in the sand for you to see. He is spelling it out. He is running through airports, shouting it at the top of his lungs. He is crying his eyes out, telling the person he loves his feelings, even if it's not canon. He is going the extra mile, even if it's punching you, even if it's picking you up off the floor to make sure you know exactly how he feels and how valued you are. There's so many examples I can think of Kagami communicating how he feels to his partners, if you multi-ship. The only example I could think of with Aki was, he smokes with him and O. And he kind of tells her some things, but does he really communicate with her? Does he? Does he tell Makima how he feels? No, he'd be quiet through those scenes. And my dogs are communicating their frustration too. He does communicate in season 1 when one of his comrades is in danger. He does communicate that he feels... Here's the thing. I've only watched season 1 of Chainsaw Man, and I feel like the people that voted for Aki have read the manga. So there is a problem with that. I have seen everything with Kuroko's Basketball nearly that I can see, so I have a very full, rounded picture of Kagami Taiga. I only have a season 1 glimpse of Aki. So a lot of my reasoning in my determination that Kagami was going to win was based on what I've seen versus Aki. I feel like Aki reminds me a lot of Fushiguro from Jujutsu Kaisen in how he communicates. And if I'm comparing him to them, they're still losing to Taiga. So I'm like, So yeah. So I had to think of it this way. I was like, okay, well, if we had kept the brackets the same, who would have Aki gone up against this round? And it was Lan G. So, and then Taiga would have been against Ash Lynx. So what I'm saying is, in some bizarro world, cinematic universe somewhere, Kagami has won this round and advanced to the Elite 8, and Romania is a much happier person. But that is not the case. And there were some people on Patreon, on the Discord, that were like, Romania, we can send you our reasonings. We can send you... I encourage you to put it down in the comments below, as long as there's not spoilers, so you can help me understand. As long as there's not spoilers, obviously. But I didn't want to do that because then I'd have to ask everyone for their opinions on the round choices, and we'd be here all day. But I was just so heartbroken over this choice. And it wasn't even a close one. It was just like, as soon as I looked at it, I was like, 60%. Well, there is no chance that it's gonna come back around. So, and people were worried. They were worried. They were like, is Aki going to win this one? I'm like, yeah. In my head, I'm going, yeah, he's going to win. Like, yeah, he's fine. And then, yeah, there were some people that were on the Discord being like, I don't know if Aki's going to win. We got to go vote for him. And in my head, I was going, please stop. Don't vote for him. But it's fine. It's fine. Can't go back now. So, as much as I want Kagami Taiga, the one person out of this husbando bracket that should have won the communication category, the one person, he's not. And I have to live with that. So, Aki Hayakawa is advancing on to the Elite 8. I did not imagine Aki getting this far. I misunderestimated the power of the Chainsaw Man fandom on Patreon. I really misunderestimated that. So it's kind of like the Oscars. You just never know what the judging pool is going to give you. So here's another one. I think this one's going to crush some souls. This one was Thorfinn from Vinland Saga versus Rei Sua from Buddy Daddies. Yep. Communication. Now, again, we've said the last couple rounds that we're going to get into some mild spoilers. I feel like this one, it really depends on your level of understanding of the stories. Because if you have only watched season 1 of Vinland Saga, then it's Rei. By far, Rei was going to win hands down. If you've watched season 2, then the aspect of communication really starts to swing in Thorfinn's favor. And so I was very curious to know the people that voted for Thorfinn, if they'd seen season 1 or if they'd seen season 2, or if they were a manga reader and have seen beyond season 2 and know even more about Thorfinn, which I don't want to know about. We'll get there, right? I'm sure Mappa will make season 3, but knock on some form of wood. But with Rei and Buddy Daddies, Rei comes across as being extremely introverted and quiet, but he does communicate. Although if it were me voting, I probably, as much as I love Rei from Buddy Daddies and want to see that show get represented, I would have voted for Thorfinn because I think season 2's Thorfinn communicates so much better and more often than Rei's character does. Honestly, Kazuki in Buddy Daddies does a lot of the communication. Rei is the more passionate, emotional of the two, I think. But I think that Kazuki is the more communicative one, and he's not in this round, so it doesn't matter. But yeah, if it had been me, I would have voted for Thorfinn. And honestly, this is the one that I'm like, damn. It was 51% to 49%. It was one vote. One vote separated these two. Don't ever say in any of these Husbando and Waifu nominations that your vote doesn't count, because so far it has counted quite a bit. And so, yeah, I was like, yeah, Thorfinn lost by one vote. And it's soul crushing. So I had two back-to-back. I had Taiga and Thorfinn, two that I thought were going to make it all the way. And nope, not today. So Rei Sua from Buddy Daddies advances on to the Elite 8. To the Elite 8. Next, we had one here that I was surprised. And I'm only surprised because I thought based on Yuji and how he's done so far in the bracket, based on the people coming out for Jujutsu Kaisen, I thought that Gojo had this in the bag. But I'm super excited that our boy Vash, who's one of my favorite protagonists, I love me some Vash. I love that they came out because here's the thing. Gojo versus Vash the Stampede for most communicative. I mean, I think that Gojo, I think it depends on how you describe communicative versus cooperative. If we were talking about cooperative, Gojo, for sure. Is Gojo going to cooperate with you? Yeah, he goes off and does his solo missions, does a lot of things on his own. But if you ask him and demand of him to be there with you, is he going to cooperate? Hell yeah. Vash, if Vash is there, is Vash going to cooperate? Sure, yeah, but Vash does like doing things a lot on his own, and he likes shouldering the burden alone, so he probably would try to like take off and do his own thing, and then just to save you or spare you. Gojo don't care. He's not going to spare you. He's going to involve you in this. may be the leader and doing the most work, but you're not going to get out of said work, right? That's not Gojo's thing. So if we've been talking about cooperation, yeah, I think Gojo would have had this in the bag. But communication, I think that Vash is a lot more... Gojo is a lot more reserved. Gojo keeps a lot more internalized and doesn't talk about as much. You can watch the first half of season 1 to know that of Jujutsu Kaisen, but Gojo's just not as much of a communicator of what they're thinking. They internalize a lot. They say only certain things that they feel are necessary, and the rest they keep inside. So it's like, ugh. Whereas Vash, if you talk to him and you break it down, he is going to talk back to you. He may be kind of like Gojo in reserving it, but I think that he eventually would open up more to you depending on the circumstance. So this was a really close poll. 2 votes. 2 votes this time. 2 votes separated Gojo and Vash from who was going to advance to the Elite 8, but it was Vash that ended up winning. Now, if they had kept to the brackets they normally would have, then it gets a little bit interesting because Vash would have been up against Jean. That could have been a questionable round. I don't exactly know how that would have gone. And Gojo would have been up against Haiji from Run with the Wind. And the thing about it is, I don't know. I think Haiji might have been able to beat him, but who knows? The Gojo and Haiji round was the one that kind of messes this whole reseeding up because Gojo ends up losing, and we might as well talk about the next round. Haiji, unfortunately, ends up losing against Yuji Itadori. So the next round, as Vash goes on to the Elite 8, was Yuji Itadori versus Haiji Kiyose. And again, this was the one that the reseeding kind of like did Haiji a little dirty. Haiji is a great communicator. He kind of does like Gojo a little bit, where he keeps some things close to the vest. He internalizes a little bit. He doesn't tell everybody what he needs to be telling, and he kind of picks and chooses his communication. But I don't think there was any way he was going to beat Yuji. It was 69% to 30. Yuji is an amazing communicator, and Yuji is not afraid to just say what he's thinking. He's like, here we go. Yuji's kind of like the shonen version of Kagami Taiga. Never going to be over it. Never. Never going to be over it. But yeah, I'm not surprised that Yuji won it all, and he won by such a large margin to go to the Elite 8. But honestly, Yuji and Nanami making it into the Elite 8 from Jujutsu Kaisen, work, bitches. I'm so excited for them. Although Haiji has a special place in my heart. I'm glad Haiji made it to the Sweet 16. I'm glad people are voting for him still. I hope people nominate him next year because Haiji is he's just such a wonderful character. I mean, how could you not like him? Then we had Lan G versus Gilbert. And back when I was telling you about Nanami and Gilbert originally being seated against one another, yeah, Gilbert was going to lose either way. I mean, here's the thing. Gilbert is a great character. He's a great Husbando nominee. But as far as communication goes, he literally, spoilers for the Violet Evergarden movie. I'll stop waving my hand when I'm done talking about spoilers. But spoilers for the movie, he isolates himself on an island and doesn't want to talk to anybody. So as good as end of spoilers, as good as Gilbert is at communication in general, there are some actions that happen with his character that you're like, no, he's not good at communication. So, and Lan G, I mean, it may take you a little bit to crack that nut open and get him to talk, but once he does, he's going to let you know exactly what he wants, exactly how he wants it, and exactly when he wants it. And you just have to sit back and go, yes, sir. Okay, sir. And that's all there is to it. So he's like the Don Mai adult of adults. So yeah, Lan G got 71% of the votes to Gilbert's 28%. Like, it was by far one of the biggest margins, definitely the biggest margin of the Husbandos. And I think for good measure. So although Lan G would have been up against Aki originally, think about that. Could have had Taiga in the fun Elite 8. No going backsies. So our last Husbando round, now that we know that Lan G is advancing to the Elite 8, our last round was Lu Guang from Link Click versus Sasaki Shumei from Sasaki to Miyano. I This one was interesting, and I think Lu Guang was affected by the fact that his character is a little bit more introverted and intentionally doesn't communicate. You have to watch Link Click to kind of understand what I'm talking about, but he intentionally keeps things close to the vest. Whereas Sasaki is just letting you know how it is. Sasaki's like, he gets a little reserved sometimes and holds some things in, but he will not hesitate to tell Miyano, be like, hey, is this okay? Are we fine? We need to talk about this. There are some times where Miyano does the same thing for Sasaki, which is great. But overall, I think that it makes sense for Sasaki to have 60% of the vote to Lu Guang's 40%, which is still pretty close. It's not a shutout, but it was enough to where I was like, yeah, Sasaki probably needs to go ahead and go. And honestly, if we had gone back and had the rounds as they originally were supposed to be, Lu Guang would have been up against Yuji. I mean, he would have lost hardcore. And Sasaki would have been up against Thorfinn. And to be honest, I think Sasaki would have beat Thorfinn. Because as much of a good communicator as Thorfinn is, Sasaki was better. So in the end, I think based on the original brackets versus the ones that were done with the reseeding, the only one that is questionable is the Gojo and Haiji one, because that could have changed the bracket a lot. And of course, Taiga and Ash Lynx. But I think in the end, it overall worked out the same regardless. But this is why I have y'all vote, because then my own personal bias doesn't get in the way. And I'm looking forward in the comments for you all justifying these actions. Because I was just like, I was very much having the Snoopy, wah, like at the end of the bracket. So let's talk now that we've sorted out our husbandos. I feel a little bit better. I feel better getting that off my chest. Let's talk about the waifus. The waifus only had one round that I was like, ooh, this is a little bit difficult. But we'll get to that here in just a second. So with the waifus, our first round was Riza Hawkeye versus Haruhi Fujioka from Ouran High School Host Club. Riza, I mean, girl is fierce. I was starting to get flashbacks of memory with Riza as we were going through these brackets. But now that we're at the Sweet 16, I was like, damn, Riza knows what she is doing. She is such a good character. I love Riza in Fullmetal Alchemist. She might be one of my favorite characters in the whole series. I love her, but she is a very good communicator. Like in terms of talking with others, talking about people she cares about, talking with the enemy. Like she is going to make sure that there are no channels blocked for information. Whereas I think honestly Haruhi is a good communicator. She maybe is a little bit more introverted than Riza, but introversion does not mean you're not good at communication, first and foremost, right? But I do think that it just came down to who was better, and 72% believed that Riza was better than Haruhi, who got 27%. It makes sense. Now, if we had been doing the brackets as they originally were before they were reseeded, we're going to talk about Haruhi at the end of this. Haruhi's kind of the outlier, but Riza would have been up against Masato, and we're going to talk about Masato here in a little bit. But I still think Riza would have won her round even against Masato, and Haruhi, we'll talk about that one in a little bit. So Riza advances to the Elite 8. Then we had Ghetto versus Violet Evergarden. It's really funny because in the Discord, everybody in the main lounge were talking about the brackets, and they were all going, oh, well, Gojo's going to win, and so is Ghetto, and they're going to advance together as husbando and waifu of 2024. And I just sat there and stared, and then went back to this document, pulled it up, and saw where the votes were, and I was like, no. Much like the Board of Gay Yearning, much like their story, it's going down in flames. Yeah, Violet Evergarden. And it's so funny because Violet Evergarden is the last person I think of as communicating because she's so quiet throughout most of her season. But then you think, oh, no, bitch is literally writing letters the whole time. She is literally communicating with everyone she encounters the entire series. It's just not verbal. And I'm like, oh, well, yeah. She's just sitting there writing Gilbert letters, being like, will you go get me a sandwich? Yeah, so it is not surprising to me that Violet beat Ghetto. And I know some people were being a little bit, they were like, we really want a wife. Some people are against the husbando and waifus crossing both brackets, and I get that. And some of them were like, well, Ghetto had his chance on the husbando bracket. Why should they get their chance on the waifu bracket? And I'm like, all right. So there is a part of me that is like, okay, we'll see. Now Ghetto's out of both. So what do you do? And I like that it's Violet that shoved him out, but Violet had 57% of the vote and Ghetto had 42. So it wasn't insanely close, but at least we can look at it this way. Ghetto and Gojo went out together in the same round, hand in hand, walking off, hopping on that rainbow dragon and just sailing off in the distance to go flitter flatter back to their island together. Yeah, I think that seems fair. Wouldn't you have felt bad if one made it and the other didn't? If we had kept the rounds as they originally would have been, Ghetto would have been up against Violet, actually. Ghetto and Violet, it's the weirdest thing. Ghetto and Violet were supposed to be together originally anyway, and then when I reseeded them, I was like, oh shit, they're still together. So there was actually another couple that this happened to as well, and we'll talk about it here in a minute, but I was like, well, it wouldn't have mattered either way. It's just the way that fate had it, right? And maybe that means that with Gojo and Haiji, fate was just the way that it was. Ghetto just wanted to end up with Gojo in the end. What can we do? All right, so Violet Evergarden is going on to the Elite Eight. Just so you know, Wine-chan, I'm doing a reaction after this, and Wine-chan has been very, very helpful for that. So those of you watching Monster Episode 71, get ready. So anyway, next we had, this was the other round I was talking about, Toru Honda from Fruits Basket versus Zhang Yanli from Modao Zushi. Originally, they were supposed to be seeded against each other anyway, and then when I reseeded it, they ended against each other again. So it didn't matter either way. And I think, honestly, Toru versus Yanli, it's a fair round. I think both of them have strong points, but here's the thing. Yanli's just got her husband. She communicates with her brothers and her husband, but not really anybody else. Toru Honda has to navigate communicating between 12 different people at all times, and navigating all that BS and herding them like a bunch of cats. Girl needs a raise. So, from what I remember of Fruits Basket, I was like, yeah, Toru winning makes a lot of sense because that girl has to do like all interpersonal communication throughout that entire series. So I am not surprised that she got 66% of the vote and Yanli got 33%. And I love Yanli. I love my lotus soup, but I'm really happy that Toru ended up making it into the Elite Eight. Then we had Miwa Kumi from Jujutsu Kaisen versus Masato Katsuragi from Neon Genesis. Now, originally, Miwa was supposed to be seeded against Historia, which we'll talk about in a minute. I think she could have beat Historia. I think so. And then originally Masato was supposed to be against Riza Hawkeye, and I don't think Masato would have beat Riza. So it makes sense with Masato. Masato is a good communicator, and I was trying to think of points where she wasn't good at communication, and that's kind of part of her job. So I feel like she is a strong communicator. It's just, are the others stronger? And I think that Miwa's whole deal, though, is Miwa, especially when it came to people she was intimate with or had intimate feelings with, was communicative and open and receptive, whereas Masato did kind of hold back some of her feelings with those she was really close with and didn't reveal them until it was nearly too late, right? And you could kind of say that might be the same case with Miwa a little bit. And you could kind of say that there's probably a stronger voting pool for Jujutsu Kaisen than Neon Genesis on Patreon at the moment. That too, but as much as I love Masato and I think that she's a major waifu and had every right to be in the top 16, I am pleasantly surprised and totally okay with Miwa Kumi making it to the Elite Eight from Jujutsu Kaisen. I'm like, work, girl. She's one of my favorites, and she's come so far since season 1 last year on the bracket, so good for her. Making it to the Elite Eight, you get it, Miwa. You get it. So then we had Shinobu from Demon Slayer versus Maki Zenen from Jujutsu Kaisen. I'm telling you, the Jujutsu Kaisen fandom just came out in droves. I think this is interesting because both Shinobu and Maki, they're not individuals I immediately think of as, oh, you're a communicator. They're just not. And I think because Maki has a twin, has a sister, and communicates with her, and also communicates to her clan, her like desire to be the head of it, and is able to communicate certain things. Whereas Shinobu, especially in her childhood that I've seen from season 1, is a bit more quiet. I guess I can kind of see why Maki took the lead, but Maki like stomped Shinobu. Maki was like 76%. Shinobu was 23%. I was like, oh, not even a question. And originally, the thing is that Shinobu would have been against Winry Rockbell, which we'll talk about in a minute. I think Winry would have beaten her out. The thing that's interesting is that Maki would have been against Akane in this round originally, who we're going to talk about next. And I think that what's interesting is, I don't know. I think Maki would have lost. So I think it's to Maki's benefit that she got reseeded against Shinobu, because I don't know if she could have beaten Akane. Speaking of which, while Maki advances to the Elite 8, let's talk about Akane. We had Akane versus Historia. Akane from Psycho Pass and Historia versus Attack on Titan. There were 3 votes separating this round. And I was kind of like, ooh, this is a little bit tricksy, right? Now, if we had gone with the original seeding, Historia would have been against Miwa. I think she would have lost based on popularity alone. But with Akane versus Historia, Akane is kind of like, and I've talked about this in Psycho Pass, she's a bit like Kagami in that she's very communicative. She is not afraid to speak her mind, say her piece, live her truth, and speak up with what she thinks is important to know. She knows when not to talk, but she's also really good at just giving what she thinks is real and communicating with others. So I think Historia, here's the thing. I think Historia can be really communicative, but girl was trying to put on a goody two-shoes act for so long in Attack on Titan that she kind of just faded into the background. And I was like, you kind of forget about Historia a little bit until like season 3, and then you're like, oh, there's Historia. We should probably talk about her. Whereas Akane is front and center with communication with her peers, with the audience, with internal monologues, everything from the start. So I'm glad that with 3 votes, she managed to edge out Historia to get into the Elite 8, because I think our girl deserves it. I really do. I hope Akane makes it into future polls and waifu nominations in the future, because she's such a great character. If you've not seen Psycho Pass and Akane, highly recommend. So Akane makes it into the Elite 8. Then we have, every poll sometimes has that one entry that gets in that you're like, did you deserve to be here? We talked about this a lot at last episode or last round, but I love Jessica Randy from Banana Fish a lot. But I think if there's any Sweet 16 person that I could have probably swapped out for literally anybody else, it's Jessica. And I like her character a lot, but she's such a side character in Banana Fish, and there were so many really good top 32 candidates that could have made it to the Sweet 16, but Jessica did, that I was like, ugh. And so it feels like karmatic justice that this round where it was reseeded is exactly what it would have been had it been originally the round. And that was her versus Yor from Spy Family. So it feels like supreme, like universal justice that they were like, nah, this is the round and how it needs to be, and Yor's gonna win. And I'm like, yes, of course. Because even though Yor doesn't want to talk about her profession, doesn't want to talk about it with others, she's still extremely communicative. She very much lets her thoughts be known. She talks a lot with our girl Anya. She like is very communicative with Lloyd when it needs to happen. So I'm not surprised at all that Yor took 70% of the vote. But Jessica getting 29% is still pretty hefty. That's not anything to shake a fist at. I'm like, okay. But I am glad. I like that Jessica made it to the Sweet 16. It is just the most baffling thing about this entire bracket so far that she made it that far. I was like, really? What? But y'all voted, so what can we do? To be fair, she was up against some interesting competition the last 2 rounds, so there is that. And then we have our last round of waifus. And that is Winry Rockbell versus Misa Amane. Remember I was going to talk about Haruhi at the beginning of this waifu bracket? Yeah. So Misa Amane originally was supposed to be against Haruhi. And Winry was originally against Shinobu. Now, I don't think it's any consolation or any doubt in anybody's mind that Winry was going to beat Shinobu, but it's kind of like the Gojo and Haiji round. You know, if Misa and Haruhi had been against each other, that could have like made things totally different. But then honestly, we have our Elite 8, and of the Elite 8, I think the ones that are in there all deserve to be. The only one that's kind of weird and kind of out there, in my opinion, is Miwa making it to the Elite 8, but I think she's justified. I think she deserves to be there. So it came down to Winry versus Misa Amane for communication, and you have 2 blondes. 2 blondes that are after some guys with some pretty big egos. One's a little bit genocidal and one's a little bit short. But I think that Winry communicates with our short king, Ed, a little bit better than Misa communicating with Light. Here's the thing. Misa communicating with Light in Death Note is just her saying words and Light cherry picking what he wants to hear and the rest just going in one ear out the other. And is that communication if it's not a two-way street? I don't know. I feel like Winry is able to interact with more characters, communicate on different levels, whereas Misa, I love Misa's character in Death Note. Don't get me wrong. I got a sweater with her face plastered on it. But I feel like as far as communication goes, Misa often gets the short end of the stick. And some of it's not her fault that it happens, but it happens. So Winry Rockbell getting 69% of the vote and Misa 30%. Makes sense, but... So yeah, that reseeding, I think overall, with the exception of like 2 or 3 rounds, it ended up being what it needed to be, but the what-if scenarios, y'all, we can fabricate and theorize and put our tinfoil hats on what could have happened, but there's no going back. So, but honestly, if we look at our Elite 8, for the Husbandos, our Elite 8 are Nanami Kento from Jujutsu Kaisen, Ash Lynx from Banana Fish, Aki from Chainsaw Man, Ray from Buddy Daddies, Vash from Trigun Stampede, Yuji from Jujutsu Kaisen, Lan G from Modazushi, and Sasaki from Sasaki and Miyano. I mean, I think those are a pretty nice Elite 8. The surprising ones for me are Aki and Ray. The others, I'm like, oh yeah, could see them totally getting the Elite 8. But Ray and Aki have been major surprises for me. I was like, okay, all right, I'm not complaining. And then I think with the waifus, Riza Hawkeye from Fullmetal Alchemist, Violet Evergarden, Toru Honda, Miwa Kasumi, Maki from Jujutsu Kaisen, Akane, Yor, and Winry. I mean, those are all 8 amazing waifus. I think Miwa is the one that surprises me the most. Maki's been like in the top 8, the Elite 8 for like 3 years running, so I'm not surprised at all about them. But Miwa's probably the one that surprises me the most, but I'm happy that she's here. She's one of my favorites, so I'm happy. But yeah, y'all, I was very excited, very thrilled about this narrowing down to the Elite 8. And it's all downhill from here. So next week, we're going to be looking at not only the Elite 8 to the Final 4, but the Final 4 to the finals. So next week, we're going to do the whole shebang. We're going to finish up the waifu and husbando brackets. We're going to talk about next year. We're going to do all sorts of stuff next week. And I think that I'm probably going to go a little bit more sober next week. After Wine Chin and I have had a great affair, I think I'm probably going to settle down, simmer down. But this Sweet 16 was a bloodbath. It was very nerve-wracking watching day to day as the polls changed and being like, I'm going to have to talk about that. So I'm super excited to hear your comments down below. I'm so curious to hear what y'all have to say about these nominees, what you thought. Did your favorites make it through, or did they suffer the bloodbath that the others suffered as well? we'll be able to talk about it next week. But I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and I'll see y'all next week with the final rounds of the top 2024 Husbando and Waifus. Bye!